Okay, let's go. Number 1. Nan Madol. You're standing on a stone platform in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There is no land beneath you. The platform under your feet is made of basalt columns, each one weighing between 5 and 50 tons, stacked like enormous logs above the surface of a coral reef lagoon. In every direction, more platforms rise out of the water, connected by narrow canals, their walls 25 feet high. There are 92 of them. 92 artificial islands, built by hand, with no metal tools, no wheels, no written plans. And the nearest place these stones could have come from is across open water, several miles away. This is Nan Madol, off the eastern shore of Pohnpei in Micronesia. The fact that it exists is one of the most genuinely baffling things anyone has ever built anywhere on Earth. 92 artificial islands, 75 hectares, 750,000 tons of basalt. Individual stones weigh 5 to 50 tons. Some cornerstones exceed 50 tons. They're stacked in what archaeologists call log cabin-style horizontal columns, interlocked like timber, rising to create walls and platforms above the lagoon. Radiocarbon dating places the major construction between 1200 and 1500 CE. At its peak, Nan Madol was the seat of the Saudalayer dynasty, the political and religious capital of Pohnpei, its ruling class housed in a city built entirely on water. The nearest basalt source is Sokaz Mountain, several miles away. Those stones had to be quarried, loaded onto rafts or canoes, navigated through the strong tidal currents of the lagoon at precisely the right moment, and lifted into position in the water. A single miscalculation, wrong tide, wrong weight distribution, wrong approach angle, and a 50-ton column goes to the bottom, gone. And this happened 750,000 times. The total population of Pohnpei during construction was between 25,000 and 30,000 people. Not just workers, everyone. Farmers, fishermen, children, the elderly. That is the entire human resource available to feed the project, manage the logistics, and keep the rest of the island alive. Archaeologist William Ayres placed the construction window at roughly 3 centuries, even spread across 300 years, moving 750,000 tons of stone across open water with that workforce has never been satisfactorily explained. Pohnpeian oral tradition doesn't try. It says twin sorcerers, Olisipa and Olosopa, descended from the sky and built Nan Madol using levitation magic. Mainstream archaeology dismisses the levitation. What it cannot dismiss is the city. It is there. UNESCO inscribed it as a World Heritage Site in 2016 and immediately added it to their danger list. Rising sea levels now threaten to submerge the walls that were built above the ocean. The Saudalayer dynasty was conquered around 1628 CE. Nan Madol was abandoned. The canals silted up, vines covered the walls, no one ever moved back. But no academic paper has answered the simplest question. Why water? Pohnpei is a large island with flat ground, rivers, farmland, fresh water. Building a city on solid ground would have been straightforward. Instead, the Saudalayer built on a coral reef lagoon, using stones transported across open ocean, creating a city that required boats to move between neighborhoods. Generations of labor, the resources of an entire island's population. To build on water when dry land sat a few hundred meters away. No explanation. The oral tradition says it was built by people who could make stones fly. That is, of course, impossible. But so is the city. How did 25,000 people move 750,000 tons of basalt across open water? Why build an entire capital on a coral reef when solid ground sat just offshore? And where did the Saudalayer go? And why has no one ever returned? Number 2. Petra. There is a crack in the rock of the Jordanian desert. It is 1.2 kilometers long and in places barely 2 meters wide. The walls rise 80 meters straight up on both sides, blocking out nearly all sunlight. You walk through it for 20 minutes. The sandstone changes color as you go, cream, then orange, then deep red. The canyon narrows until your shoulders nearly brush both walls. And then, at the far end of the crack, a facade appears. 130 feet tall. Columns and pediments and urns cut from living rock with a precision that looks impossible. This is the treasury of Petra. It is just the entrance. Behind it lies an entire city, not built from stone but carved out of it, into the cliffs, by a nomadic Arab people called the Nabateans, in one of the most waterless stretches of the Near East. At their peak, Between the 1st century BCE and the 1st century CE, somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 people lived here. Archaeologist Judith Mackenzie's survey documented the scale: an amphitheater seating 8,500, a colonnaded main street, hundreds of tomb facades, temples, a royal quarter. All of it cut from the same rose-red sandstone surrounding the city on every side. The Nabateans were, before Petra, nomads. Caravan traders controlling roughly 40% of the ancient world's incense and spice trade, and they built their capital inside a bowl of desert cliffs, accessible through a single crack in the rock. Not in spite of the terrain, because of it. The Sikh was a military masterstroke. 10 soldiers with bows in the narrowest section could hold off any attacking force. The location that looks like the most impractical place on earth to build a city was a deliberate defensive calculation. But defense doesn't explain the water. No rivers, no springs, no lakes inside the natural cliff perimeter, and yet 30,000 people lived there. The Nabateans built over 200 kilometers of ceramic pipes, rock-cut channels, cisterns carved from the cliff walls, and dams designed to catch and redirect the flash floods that occasionally roared through the Sikh. They captured every raindrop. They piped it. They supplied a desert city of tens of thousands from infrastructure carved entirely by hand. Scholars from Brown University have documented the system. It worked so effectively that even the Romans, who conquered Petra in 106 CE, built on top of what the Nabateans had already made, rather than replacing it. Trade routes shifted over the following centuries. The city's economic importance declined. By the 7th century, Petra was largely empty. By the medieval period, only a few Bedouin families lived among the facades. In 1812, a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt wanted to visit. He disguised himself as a Muslim pilgrim to gain access. He made it in, published the first Western account, and was celebrated as the man who rediscovered Petra. The Bedouin family who guided him there had known it was there the entire time. Only about 15% of Petra has been excavated. In 2016, archaeologists using drone mapping found a massive, buried, monumental structure just south of the city center, invisible from the ground. Why did nomadic people choose one of the least hospitable locations in the Near East to build one of the most sophisticated cities of the ancient world? How did they engineer 200 kilometers of water supply from desert rock? And what is in the other 85%? From a city hidden in a cliff, we climb higher to a city that chose not a cliff face, but a mountaintop so narrow that building there at all seems like a deliberate act of defiance against gravity. Number 3. Machu Picchu. Stand at the base of the Urubamba River in Peru and look up. The ridge above you is 1,800 feet of vertical rock. At the top of that ridge, barely visible from below, there is a city. The Incas built it in the late 15th century on a spine of land so narrow that the ground drops away steeply into gorges on both sides. No flat land, no natural water source at the summit. And the stones, some weighing over 100 tons, were fitted together so precisely that a knife blade cannot be inserted between any two of them. No mortar. Just stone against stone, cut with bronze tools to tolerances that would challenge a modern stonemason. Machu Picchu sits at 7,972 feet above sea level. Construction began around 1450 CE under the Sapa Inca Pachacuti and was largely complete within 80 years. The site contains more than 140 structures, temples, palaces, terraced gardens connected by 3,000 stone steps, fed by a spring that Inca engineers diverted through underground channels to supply 16 fountains cascading through the city in sequence. Hydrologist Kenneth Wright analyzed the system and found something remarkable. The spring diversion wasn't simply about water supply. It was engineered to control groundwater saturation and prevent the ridge from sliding. They weren't just building on the mountain, they were stabilizing it. The masonry is the other impossibility. The Inca used ashlar construction, each stone cut into a unique, irregular polygon, fitted against its neighbors on every face. No repeating pattern, no mortar. And the joints are angled so that seismic force actually drives the stones tighter together rather than apart. Machu Picchu has been through 5 centuries of Andean earthquakes. The walls have not moved. This knowledge existed entirely in the minds of the builders. The Inca had no written language, no blueprints, no building specifications, no record of who designed the spring diversion or chose this particular ridge. Everything was transmitted through memory and practice. The Spanish arrived in Peru in 1532. Over the following decades, they dismantled the Inca Empire methodically, documented every city and road they found, and filed reports for the crown with bureaucratic thoroughness. Machu Picchu appears in none of them, not once. The most likely explanation is that it was already abandoned, possibly cleared by a smallpox epidemic that outran the conquest itself. The city sat empty on its ridge, unmolested, for 3.5 centuries. In 1911, historian Hiram Bingham arrived in the Urubamba Valley looking for a different lost Inca site. A local farmer named Melchor Arteaga offered to show him something. Bingham followed him up the ridge and found the ruins, where a Quechua family had been farming the terraces for years. The local people had never lost it. Bingham published in National Geographic. The world called it a discovery. Why this ridge? Why abandon it? And how did the most thorough colonial documentation project in South American history miss a city visible from the valley below? From a city on top of the world, we descend all the way down into one built 280 feet beneath it. Number 4. Derinkuyu. In 1963, a man renovating his basement in central Turkey knocked through a wall and found a tunnel. He followed it. The tunnel led to a room. The room led to another tunnel. That tunnel led to another room, and another, descending deeper into the ground. He had found the largest underground city ever discovered, 18 stories deep, 280 feet below the surface, with ventilation shafts, wells, kitchens, wine presses, stables, chapels, schools, and enough space to shelter 20,000 people with their livestock and food supply. It had been there the entire time, under the streets, under the houses. The geology made it possible. The volcanic tuff rock beneath Cappadocia is soft enough to carve with bronze tools and hard enough, once dry, to hold a tunnel indefinitely. Whoever built Derinkuyu exploited this across 18 vertical levels, boring 52 ventilation shafts some 180 feet deep to pull fresh air to every room. Modern cave engineers, presented with the problem of ventilating an 18-level underground structure for 20,000 people without mechanical systems, reach for computer modeling. Derinkuyu solved this with stone tools, working from the top down, in the dark. The city has everything a permanent settlement needs: stables, wine and oil presses, grain storage, independent wells drilled to groundwater supplies that couldn't be cut from the surface, a church, what appears to have been a school. The layout is not trial and error, it is designed. And then there are the doors. On each level, a massive circular stone disc, the smallest around 1,000 pounds, the largest closer to 1,500. They roll along channels cut in the rock. They seal using a bar that drops into a hole on the inner face. From the passage side, if the door is closed, there is no mechanism to open it. The doors can only be unlocked from inside the city. Every other element of Derinkuyu can be framed as practical engineering. The ventilation, the water, the food storage. A door that locks only from the inside is not protection against being broken out. It is protection against being broken in. Something was trying to get in, and 20,000 people decided to go 280 feet underground to avoid it, sealing stone doors behind them on every level as they descended. The standard attribution places earliest construction in the Hittite period, around 1500 BCE, with Phrygian expansion in the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, and later use by early Christians hiding from Roman persecution. At some point, a tunnel was dug connecting Derinkuyu to Kaymakli, another underground city 5 miles away. Over 200 underground settlements have been identified across Cappadocia. This region spent centuries carving civilization downward. The debris has never been explained. To hollow out 280 feet of underground space across 18 levels requires removing an estimated 2.5 million cubic feet of rock. That rock would have created a mountain of rubble visible for miles. No corresponding debris field exists near the site. What were they hiding from? What threat made 280 feet of rock overhead feel like the safe choice? And where is the debris from 2.5 million cubic feet of excavation? Derinkuyu was built to be invisible from above. Our next city made the opposite choice, built in full view of anyone who looked up at exactly the right cliff. Number 5. Cliff Palace. You see nothing until you're standing at exactly the right angle. Sandstone canyon walls, a 700-foot drop to the valley floor, scrub brush on the rim. Then you shift position slightly, and a city appears inside the cliff, not on top of it, not beneath it, but tucked into a natural alcove halfway up the canyon wall, suspended between earth and air. Cliff Palace was built by the ancestral Puebloan people around 1190 CE. It is the largest cliff dwelling in North America. 150 rooms, 23 kivas, the circular ceremonial chambers that formed the spiritual center of Puebloan life, assembled inside a sandstone alcove 216 feet wide and 89 feet deep, housing up to 120 people. The building stones were cut from nearby outcroppings. The wooden beams supporting the upper floors were pine and juniper logs hauled up the cliff face from 700 feet below. That word hauled is where the impossibility lives. The canyon floor was where the ancestral Puebloans farmed, where they collected water, where they hunted. Every single day, every adult climbed down 700 feet of vertical rock to work, then climbed back up carrying water, firewood, harvested crops, game. They used handholds and toeholds cut into the cliff face. Some sections required crossing exposed ledges, with nothing below but hundreds of feet of open air. Archaeologists, who've retraced the routes, describe the climbing as technically demanding, even for experienced rock climbers. For these people, it was the morning commute. The occupation lasted from approximately 1190 to 1300 CE, 110 years. The reason for abandonment is one of the few, well-documented answers in ancient mysteries. Tree ring data from the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research at the University of Arizona shows a 23-year drought beginning in 1276 CE. The ancestral Puebloans left Mesa Verde entirely, migrating south and east to become the ancestors of the Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and other modern Pueblo peoples of New Mexico and Arizona communities that still regard Mesa Verde as a place of deep ancestral significance. In 1888, rancher Richard Wetherill looked across a canyon and saw Cliff Palace for the first time, the first European to document it. His Ute guides that day had always known it was there. The drought explains why they left. It doesn't explain why they went up there in the first place. The mesa top offered flat, farmable ground in abundance. Life on the surface would have been straightforward. Instead, they descended the cliff to farm and climbed back up to sleep in an alcove requiring technical climbing to access. The best explanation is defense. The 1200s were a period of regional conflict, and even a small group could hold those handholds against a much larger force simply by standing at the top and removing the ladders. They paid the physical cost of vertical commuting for a century. Then a drought removed the agricultural base and they were gone. What threat was severe enough to make that daily vertical climb the preferable way to live? And what does it say about the 13th century American Southwest that the safest address a community could find was halfway up a cliff face? From a city hiding in a cliff, we descend to a desert floor and a city built in a place with even less business, having 30,000 people in it. Number 6. Chan Chan. The Atacama Desert is the driest non-polar desert on Earth. Some of its interior weather stations have operated for decades without recording a single drop of rainfall. NASA uses sections of it to test Mars rovers because the conditions are comparable. On the coastal edge of this desert, in what is now northern Peru, 30,000 people built the largest pre-Columbian city in South America and lived there for 600 years. Chan Chan, capital of the Chimu Empire, covered 20 square kilometers. 9 royal citadels, the ciudadelas, each surrounded by adobe walls, up to 9 meters high, their surfaces decorated with geometric friezes of fish and seabirds. Marine imagery on the walls of a desert city. The irony was accurate. The ocean was the city's lifeline. The Chimu understood that the Pacific fed the rivers flowing down from the Andes, and those rivers were the only water available. So they built an 80-kilometer canal system drawing from the Moche River. They added a second canal, 74 kilometers long, from the Chicama Valley, the longest pre-Columbian hydraulic canal in South America. They cut sunken garden beds, called huachaks, directly into the desert floor, digging down to the water table and farming below the surface of the surrounding desert. They distributed groundwater wells through the city as backup. Population at peak. Up to 40,000 people, sustained entirely by engineering in a landscape that receives essentially no rain. The precision of this water management cannot be overstated. The Chimu worked without hydrological models, without modern surveying tools, without recorded precedent in the region. Their canal gradients were engineered to maintain flow rates that prevented both silting and erosion, a calculation that requires understanding fluid dynamics well enough to get it right the first time, because a canal 74 kilometers long cannot easily be regraded if the angle is wrong. The Wachacs were positioned based on an empirical understanding of the local water table that no written record survives to explain. The Chimu Empire rose around 850 CE and controlled a 1,000-kilometer stretch of the Peruvian coast. Each of the 9 ciudadelas represents a different ruler when a king died. His compound was sealed, and a new one was built for his successor. A city that grew by building a fresh administrative center every generation. In 1470 CE, the Inca conquered the Chimu. They didn't simply plunder Chan Chan. They relocated the Chimu's most skilled water engineers to Cusco to teach Inca construction teams how the system worked. The people who built the world's largest adobe city became prisoners of their own expertise. Their knowledge traveled 1,000 miles north. Chan Chan is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site and on UNESCO's endangered list not because of drought, but because El Niño events periodically bring intense rainfall to a coast and a city built entirely on the assumption that rain would never come. The adobe walls that survived 6 centuries of desert are dissolving in the rain. How did the Chimu engineer 74 kilometers of functional irrigation canal without modern surveying and get the gradient right? Why choose one of the driest places on Earth rather than building somewhere water was available? And why did a conquering empire feel compelled to kidnap engineers rather than simply execute them? From a city that invented its own water, to a city that invented its own rules about how cities should work. Number 7. Catalhoyuk. Look at an aerial photograph of Catalhoyuk, the Neolithic settlement on the Konya Plain in central Turkey, and what you see is a dense field of mud brick rectangles, packed so tightly against each other that there is no space between them. No alleys, no courtyards, no streets, walls touching walls, a solid mass of structures in which every building is in direct contact with every building next to it. It looks less like a city than like a single enormous structure divided into rooms. The people who lived here did not have front doors. When archaeologist James Mellaart excavated in 1961, he found a settlement of up to 10,000 people organized on a principle with no parallel in any other city ever studied. Movement happened entirely across the rooftops. You left your home by climbing a ladder to the roof, walked across your neighbor's roof, then their neighbor's, until you reached your destination. Entry to each home was through a hole in the roof. You descended into your living space below. The ground between the buildings was not a street. It was a refuse alley, accessible only from above. Inside the typical house, raised sleeping platforms, a hearth with a mud brick chimney, storage bins, and this is the part that takes a moment to fully register the graves of the family's dead. Dug directly beneath the floor of the main room, sometimes beneath the sleeping platforms themselves, residents buried their dead under their own floors and continued living above them. They occasionally reopened the graves to retrieve skulls, which they plastered, decorated, and kept in the house. Archaeologists have found plastered skulls, positioned in corners, under benches, set into wall niches. The settlement was occupied continuously from approximately 7,500 to 5,700 BCE, around 1,500 years of uninterrupted habitation. During the entire period, excavation has found no palace, no large temple separate from domestic space, no structure significantly larger than any other house, no visible wealth gradient, no burial significantly richer than any other. If there was a ruler of Catalhoyuk, they left no trace. 18 occupation levels, 1,500 years, no apparent hierarchy. Ian Hodder's excavations from 1993 onward found evidence of ritual specialists, individuals whose houses contained more elaborate symbolic decoration, more plastered skulls, more carefully arranged animal remains, a kind of informal status perhaps, without the material concentration of formal authority. Something governed 10,000 people for 15 centuries. It wasn't a king, and it worked. Whatever that something was, Catalhoyuk lasted longer than Rome, longer than the entire span of Egyptian dynastic civilization, longer than any modern nation-state has yet existed. The city was abandoned around 5700 BCE. No catastrophe in the record. People simply stopped building and moved on. Why no streets? Why bury your dead beneath your own floor and live there for generations? And what mechanism invisible to the archaeological record sustained a city of 10,000 people with no identifiable authority for 1,500 years? From a city organized in a way we don't understand, to one organized in a way we recognize: completely grid streets, standardized construction, covered sewers built 5,000 years ago, then erased without explanation. Number 8. Mohenjo-Daro. In 2500 BCE, while the Egyptians were building the pyramids and the Sumerians were writing the first legal codes, a city was rising on the banks of the Indus River in what is now Pakistan that had something neither of them had: covered sewers. Running beneath every street, bricked, roofed, connected to individual homes through drainage channels that carried waste away from the city. Individual homes had wells. Some had private toilet rooms with drainage connected to the main sewer beneath the street. This was infrastructure designed into the city from the beginning, present in every residential district, built 4,500 years ago, and not matched again by most cities in the world until the 19th century. Mohenjo-Daro sat on a grid. Streets ran true north-south and east-west, intersecting at right angles, the main thoroughfares 10 meters wide. Kiln-fired bricks harder and more water-resistant than adobe were used throughout, in a standardized ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. And that same ratio appears at Harappa, 400 miles north, and at dozens of other Indus Valley sites, not approximate, identical. A civilization spanning hundreds of cities across a subcontinent had agreed on a single brick specification, and no record of that agreement exists. There was no Roman Empire imposing standards here. Just consistency, inexplicably maintained across a vast territory. The Great Bath at the center of the upper citadel, 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, lined with waterproofed brick, was almost certainly used for ritual bathing, the ancestor of a tradition running through South Asian religious practice to this day. Surrounding it were administrative halls and ceremonial spaces. The civic organization implied by all of this, the standardization, the sanitation, the Great Bath, the grid rivals the best-governed cities of the ancient world. No palace, no royal burial, no inscription naming a king. Every other major ancient civilization left behind concentrated evidence of ruling power: the pharaohs, the god-kings of Mesopotamia, the Shang dynasty emperors. The Indus Valley left nothing of the kind. We cannot identify who was in charge of one of the most advanced urban civilizations in history. The Indus script visible on thousands of carved seals found across the sites remains undeciphered. Over 4,000 inscribed objects. No one can read any of them. We have the words of an entire civilization carved into stone, and we cannot hear a single one. R.D. Banerjee discovered Mohenjo-Daro in 1922, investigating a medieval Buddhist stupa. When he excavated, he found the stupa was sitting on top of a city thousands of years older. The stupa's builders had no idea what they were standing on. Around 1900 BCE, Mohenjo-Daro and the entire Indus Valley civilization collapsed not one city, but all of them, across hundreds of sites, simultaneously. Skeletal remains found in the streets, unburied, in positions suggesting sudden death. The cause remains genuinely unknown. Climate shift, river course change, epidemic, none has been proven. How did an ancient civilization standardize brick dimensions across hundreds of cities on a subcontinent without a central authority we can identify? Why does no ruling class appear in the archaeological record? And what collapsed an entire civilization across hundreds of cities all at once? From a civilization whose writing we cannot read, we travel to one whose greatest city was deliberately removed from history, not by time, but by the deliberate choice of people who found the truth inconvenient. Number 9. Great Zimbabwe. On a granite plateau in southern Zimbabwe, there is a structure that should have changed everything the Western world thought it knew about pre-colonial African civilization. For almost a century, it didn't, because the people who first documented it in European records refused to accept what it implied. Great Zimbabwe is the largest stone structure in sub-Saharan Africa. The great enclosure's outer wall runs 255 meters in circumference, stands 11 meters high, and is 5 meters thick, built from approximately 900,000 dressed granite blocks. No mortar, no internal support. It has stood for 600 years. The granite was sourced from the plateau itself, where geological processes cause the rock to naturally exfoliate in flat slabs. The builders harvested stone the earth had already prepared, stacking 900,000 of those slabs into a wall 11 meters high, while maintaining the structural integrity of a curve 255 meters around is, regardless of how cooperative the geology is, a remarkable engineering achievement. Inside the great enclosure stands the conical tower, 10 meters tall, completely solid. No interior chamber, no staircase, no room. No one knows what it was for. Grain storage symbol, fertility monument, astronomical marker, every explanation has been proposed, none proven. The tower stands where it was placed, and the people who built it left no written record, because they had no writing system. At its peak, in the 14th and 15th centuries, Great Zimbabwe housed 10,000 to 18,000 people, and served as the capital of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, an empire controlling gold and ivory routes from the southern African interior to the Swahili coast. Chinese porcelain, Persian faience, and Near Eastern glass have been found in the excavations. A trading empire that reached India and China, with no currency, no writing, and no surviving administrative record. When German explorer Karl Mauck arrived in 1871, he concluded it must have been built by the Queen of Sheba or Phoenicians. That it was built by Africans was, in his framework, simply not possible. In 1891, the British Association hired J.T. Bent to investigate. Bent concluded it was built by a prehistoric race of non-African origin. In 1929, Gertrude Caton Thompson conducted a systematic excavation with a team of female archaeologists, analyzed the stratigraphy carefully, and concluded definitively that Great Zimbabwe was built by indigenous Bantu-speaking people, ancestors of the modern Shona. Her methodology was sound. Her conclusion was correct. She was ridiculed, and her findings were ignored. By the 1970s, the colonial government of Rhodesia had made denial of African origin official policy. Archaeologists at the site were pressured not to publish findings that confirmed indigenous construction. Researcher Paul Sinclair later documented the systematic suppression. A modern government deployed state authority to enforce a lie about who had built a 6-century-old city. In 1980, Zimbabwe achieved independence and named itself after the ancient site. The international consensus formally accepted Caton Thompson's 1929 conclusion. It had taken 50 years and a revolution. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe collapsed around 1450 CE. Overgrazing, deforestation, and agricultural failure. No invader destroyed it. Its people simply left. What was the conical tower for? How did an empire trading across the Indian Ocean leave no writing, no coins, no administrative record that survived? And what does the 50-year campaign to deny its existence reveal about whose history gets written down and whose gets erased? From an empire deliberately erased, we end where erasure took a different form not by politics, but by fire and 6 centuries of silence. Number 10. Teotihuacan. When the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico, sometime around the 13th century CE, they found a city already ancient and empty. Pyramids stretching 4 kilometers along a central avenue. Apartment compounds vast enough to house hundreds of thousands, now silent. They had no legend explaining who had built it, no oral tradition naming its founders. They called it Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods, because it seemed like the kind of place where something sacred had once happened. They used it as a pilgrimage site. They buried their dead there. They named the pyramids. The Pyramid of the Sunday. The Pyramid of the Moon. Those are Aztec names. No one has ever found what the original builders called them. If the original builders had names for anything for the city, the pyramids themselves, those names are gone. At its peak, between approximately 100 and 550 CE, Teotihuacan was one of the largest cities on Earth. Population estimates range from 100,000 to 200,000 people, comparable to contemporary Rome and Constantinople. The 6th or 7th largest urban center in the world during its time. The city covered 20 square kilometers. The Avenue of the Dead ran 4 kilometers from the Pyramid of the Moon to the Ciudadela in the south, 40 meters wide, flanked on both sides by platforms and pyramids. The Pyramid of the Sun, rising at the avenue's midpoint, is the third largest pyramid in the world by volume. Its base is nearly identical in dimension to the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its builders aligned it so that on the spring and fall equinoxes, the sun sets directly in front of it viewed from the avenue. No inscription anywhere in the city names a ruler. No royal tomb has been found. No monument records a dynasty. The city had elaborate murals and iconographic programs throughout its structures, but nothing that names the city, the culture, or the people who lived there. The Aztecs, who inherited the entire tradition of Mesoamerican civilization that descended from Teotihuacan's influence, had no idea who had built it. That is not a gap in the record. That is the record. Beneath the Pyramid of the Sun, archaeologist Doris Hayden discovered a natural lava tube cave in 1971. The cave runs 100 meters under the pyramid's center, ending in a four-lobed chamber. The Pyramid of the Sun was built directly over it, with an access tunnel constructed to lead precisely to the underground chambers. The cave came first. The pyramid was built to mark it. Why that cave warranted one of the largest structures in the ancient world placed directly above it remains unknown. Around 550 CE, someone set fire to Teotihuacan, not the whole city, specifically the elite compounds. The administrative buildings, the ritual centers, the palace structures along the Avenue of the Dead. The burning is concentrated precisely where power would have been concentrated. Residential areas show far less evidence of fire. René Millen, whose Teotihuacan mapping project produced the most comprehensive survey of the site, interpreted this as internal revolt. The city's population rising against its ruling class and burning what they had built. After the fires, the city depopulated slowly over the following century. It was never re-inhabited at scale. Throughout the structures, in layers beneath floors and within walls, researchers have found sheets of mica. Mica has no structural function in construction. It is, however, a semiconductor and an electrical insulator. Its presence in a city with no name, no ruler, and a deliberate fire is one more detail that refuses to resolve. These 10 cities, a capital on the ocean, a city in the desert, a settlement 280 feet underground, a metropolis inside a cliff, represent the outer edges of what we've found. Each one challenges the assumption that the past moved in a straight line, from primitive to advanced. Some of the most sophisticated engineering decisions in human history were made by people we have no record of, in places no one should have chosen, for reasons that remain unclear. They built anyway. And in many cases, what they built has outlasted everything we thought we understood about them. If you found this worth your time, subscribe, there's more here. Like if the algorithm should show this to someone who'd actually stay to the end. And drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from?